Sorry you're not on the guest list, the security guard said, blocking the grand entrance to the ballroom. I stood there stunned. My name, Stella, was missing from the list for the most exclusive cybersecurity tech gala in Austin. Inside the hall, I saw the woman I knew better than anyone, the star of the evening, surrounded by flashbulbs and applause. Beside her stood the two people who raised us, smiling with pride as they soaked in the spotlight. They were celebrating a massive funding round, a milestone built entirely on my professional expertise and years of tireless risk assessment. Yet, as our eyes met across the velvet ropes, she didn't motion for the guard to let me in. She didn't signal my parents to acknowledge me. She simply looked away, adjusting her designer dress as if I were a stranger, haunting her polished, curated life. In that moment, the realization hit me harder than any insult. They weren't just excluding me from a party. They were erasing me from the narrative of their success to maintain the self-made image she had crafted for the investors. The humiliation was sharp, but it lasted only a second. I didn't beg, and I certainly didn't make a scene. I turned my back on the glittering hall, walked to my car, and pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the contact for my senior partner. With one single call, I could pull the safety net out from under the entire house of cards they were standing on. This call was the end of her performance. If you've ever had the people who owe you everything treat you like you're nothing, you know that silence isn't submission, it's the calm before the storm. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss how this empire comes crashing down. The engine of my sedan was still idling as I pulled my phone from the center console. My fingers moved with mechanical precision, hitting the speed dial for Gregory, the senior partner at my firm. I didn't wait for pleasantries. Gregory, I'm initiating a formal withdrawal from the Nina cybersecurity project. I stated, my voice steady against the hum of the air conditioning. Effective immediately, I am resigning as the lead financial reviewer and guarantor for their current funding round. There is a material conflict of interest that has been concealed from our firm's investment committee. There was a pause on the other end, followed by the sound of Gregory's chair shifting. He was a man who understood the weight of those words. Stella, you realize the implications. You are the primary guarantor. If you pull out, the entire due diligence framework for this round collapses. What exactly are you looking at? I'm looking at a deliberate attempt to manipulate our valuation metrics, I replied, staring out at the blurred city lights. Nina has been operating under the assumption that I would rubber stamp her reports without verification. That ends now. I want a full compliance review triggered on the entire account history. Gregory didn't hesitate. Understood. I will flag this in the internal database and notify our legal department to issue a formal notice of material risk. I'll CC Marcus and the co-investor syndicate. Are you prepared for the fallout? This will halt their closing process instantly. I am prepared, I said, ending the call. I opened my firm's secure mobile portal. My hands didn't shake as I navigated to the project dashboard. This was the same interface I had used for months to ensure their financial health, inputting data that Nina would later present as her own genius business maneuvers. I uploaded the formal request for a compliance audit, specifically citing the discrepancies in the expense reports I had observed earlier that week. Within minutes, the system status turned from active to compliance hold. I hit the command to generate the notice of material risk. This wasn't just an internal memo, it was a legally binding document that notified every institutional investor involved in the syndicate that the data currently underpinning Nina's valuation could not be verified by the lead auditor, me. The weight of the last 3 years suddenly felt different. I had built that company's credibility with my own reputation. Every investor who had poured millions into that cybersecurity platform did so because my name was on the vetting documents. I had been their secret weapon, the invisible hand ensuring their growth, while Nina performed the role of the visionary CEO. I checked my email. A notification flashed: notice of material risk, sent to all stakeholders. My eyes scanned the list of recipients, Marcus, the board members of the syndicate, and the legal counsel for both sides. The system had processed the request. Now the information was in their inboxes. They would be seeing the red warning flags attached to the account status. They would see that the firm's lead reviewer was officially disavowing the latest financial disclosures. I looked at the screen one last time. There was no going back. The machinery of the investment firm was now moving against her. It was a cold, systematic process designed to protect capital, and it was entirely indifferent to the fact that the CEO on the other side of the screen was my sister. I wasn't just another employee. I was the architect of her professional existence, and tonight, I was dismantling that architecture piece by piece. I put the phone back in the dock and shifted the car into drive. The notification light remained steady. The warning had been delivered. Nina would be walking into a firestorm she didn't even know was burning yet. She had wanted to play the role of a titan without the substance to back it up, and now she would have to face the cold reality of the market. My part in her performance was over. 45 minutes later, the quiet of my apartment was shattered by the persistent vibration of my phone on the granite kitchen island. The caller ID flashed Marcus. My hands remained steady as I picked up. Stella, I'm looking at a compliance review notification that just hit the board's portal. Marcus said, his voice stripped of its usual investor confidence. It claims the data in the latest funding round is unverifiable. What is going on? We are 2 hours away from the final signature. I leaned against the counter, staring at the muted television screen. Marcus, I've completed my assessment of the back-end data. I can no longer support the valuation Nina has provided to this syndicate. As of tonight, I have formally disavowed the financial disclosures. Disavowed! Marcus echoed, his tone sharp. You're the one who built this model. If you say it's unverifiable, the entire deal is dead in the water. I have millions of dollars sitting in escrow ready for the wire transfer. Are you telling me to pull the plug? I'm telling you that my name is no longer attached to those numbers, I stated firmly. Whatever you decide to do with the capital is your call, but the projections Nina presented are not compliant with my professional standards. The line went silent. I knew exactly what was happening on his end. He was weighing the risks. An investor of his stature did not move forward when the lead auditor walked away. I'm putting a hold on the closing, Marcus said, his voice now cold and clinical. I'm stopping all wire transfers effective immediately. I have a team of internal investigators coming in tomorrow morning. If there is a discrepancy in the software architecture or the revenue reports, I intend to find it. I expect nothing less. I replied and ended the call. The silence that followed didn't last. My phone began to ping with messages from colleagues who were currently at the gala. The mood in the ballroom just shifted. Lawyers from the firm were spotted walking straight into the private VIP lounge. Nina was just pulled off the stage by her assistant. They've closed the doors to the main meeting room. The announcement of the funding round was just cancelled. The MC told everyone there's been a technical delay. The tech bloggers are already crowding the exit. They're asking why the lead guarantor isn't in the room and why the funding news hasn't hit the wire. I watched the notifications stack up. The efficiency of the firm's response was exactly what I had designed it to be. When you pull the anchor, the ship doesn't just stop, it begins to drift uncontrollably. By now, the board members had to be demanding answers. Nina would be standing in that locked room, her expensive dress and rehearsed smile, failing to answer the one question that mattered. Where did the numbers come from? I didn't need to see the panic on her face to know it was there. She was a CEO who had spent years hiding behind my due diligence. Without me to validate the architecture, she was just a person in an expensive room with nothing to show for it. I set the phone down and moved to my home office. I didn't reach out to anyone for updates. I didn't scroll through social media to see the fallout. Instead, I pulled up the primary folders for the audit. I needed to ensure that my own records were perfectly organized for the inquiry Marcus would be starting the next morning. My work was not just about stopping her. It was about ensuring that when the dust settled, the truth was documented with undeniable clarity. I spent the next several hours cross-referencing expense logs and revenue projections, creating a master index of every discrepancy I had uncovered. Every document was time-stamped and verified. By the time I closed my laptop, the sense of urgency that had gripped me at the gala had transformed into a calm, focused determination. The chaos currently unfolding in that ballroom was not my concern. I had done my job. I had provided the warning, and now the professional ecosystem would handle the rest. I walked away from the desk, leaving the documents ready for the morning. At 11:45 p.m., the chime of my apartment door echoed through the hallway. It was a sharp, repetitive sound that signaled someone was standing directly outside, unwilling to leave. I walked to the door and engaged the electronic peephole. Nina was standing in the center, her makeup slightly smeared. Mom and Dad stood behind her, their expressions a mix of confusion and indignation. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. "Stella, what have you done?" Nina demanded, bypassing any greeting. She stepped into the entryway before I could even fully open the door. "My investor relations team is telling me there's a compliance hold on the wire transfer. Marcus isn't answering his phone, and his legal team just told me they aren't authorized to discuss the project with me." "I haven't done anything that wasn't already in the protocol," I replied, standing my ground. Mom moved forward, her hands clasped tightly. "Stella, honey, don't be ridiculous. Nina is your sister. She's worked for years to get to this point. If there's some kind of glitch in the system, you need to fix it. Just give Marcus a call and tell him it's a technical error. Surely you can clear this up with one phone call." Dad stepped closer as well, his voice lowered into that tone he always used when he wanted me to drop a professional boundary. "Think about the family name Stella. This funding was supposed to be the highlight of Nina's career. If this falls through, she's going to be the laughingstock of the Austin tech scene. You're a senior partner. You have the leverage. Just pick up the phone and tell them you made a mistake in the audit." I looked at them one by one. Nina's eyes were wide, fueled by an entitlement that bordered on mania. She still truly believed that the world would bend because she wanted it to. "This isn't a glitch, and it isn't a mistake," I said, my voice cold. "The compliance hold is a direct result of the audit findings. I am not calling Marcus, and I am not calling the legal department to reverse their findings." "You don't understand." Nina snapped, her voice rising. "I've told the board that we are expanding operations next month. I've signed contracts based on this capital. If that money doesn't hit the account tomorrow morning, I'm in breach of contract. Do you want to see me lose everything?" "I want to see things done correctly," I countered. "The process is designed to protect the integrity of the firm. I don't interfere with that process." Mom's face hardened. She no longer looked concerned for Nina. She looked annoyed that I was being an obstacle. "You've always been jealous of Nina. Even when you were little, you had to be the one who followed the rules, while she was the one who actually achieved things. This is spite, pure and simple. Tell them you were wrong." "I am not having this conversation," I said, my patience for their manipulation reaching its limit. "The situation is in the hands of the compliance team. There is nothing more for me to say to any of you tonight." "You are being incredibly selfish," Nina shouted, her composure finally breaking. "I have dedicated my life to this company. You're sitting here in your fancy apartment acting like you have the right to burn it all down. You don't have the authority to do this." "Actually, I do," I said. "And I've done it." I stepped back and gestured toward the door. "Leave. Now." Dad looked as if he was going to launch into a lecture, but I held up my hand to stop him. I didn't care about the family name. I didn't care about Nina's contracts. I was done with the performative burden of being the one who had to ensure their reality remained intact. They stood there for a moment, clearly stunned that I was refusing to budge. Nina looked as if she might scream, but the coldness in my expression seemed to stop her. One by one, they retreated into the hallway. I didn't wait for them to finish their protest. I closed the door and engaged every lock. As soon as I heard their footsteps fading toward the elevator, I accessed the apartment's security settings on my tablet. I selected the contact entries for Nina, Mom, and Dad, and blocked them from all communication channels. The apartment returned to a state of absolute quiet. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel like a villain. I felt for the first time in a long time completely clear-headed. They were no longer my responsibility. At 8 a.m., the office of the investment firm was already humming with activity. I walked past the reception desk and headed straight for the conference room, my mind focused entirely on the day's agenda. Before I could reach the door, a familiar face stepped out of the break room. It was my best friend, Chloe. She had her usual morning coffee in hand and caught my eye immediately. She walked over, her expression serious but supportive, and placed a hand on my shoulder. "I heard what happened last night," she said quietly. "You're doing the right thing, Stella. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise. You've worked too hard to let this slide." She gave my shoulder a firm, grounding squeeze and added, "I'm here if you need anything at all today," before turning back toward her department. It was a brief, steadying moment that helped me clear the last of the noise from my head. Inside the conference room, Gregory and two representatives from the forensic accounting team were waiting. The table was covered in printouts of the company's recent ledger entries. Gregory didn't offer any small talk. He gestured for me to sit and slid a thick folder toward me. "We've spent the night going through the secondary accounts," Gregory began. "The forensic team has finished the initial analysis of the project expenditures." One of the accountants opened the folder to a series of highlighted pages. "Evidence indicates," the lead auditor said, pointing to a column of figures, "that a significant portion of the funds earmarked for infrastructure development was redirected. We have tracked at least 6 large payments to vendors that have no relation to the security platform. These appear to be personal expenses disguised as operational costs." I scanned the documents. The numbers were precise. There were payments for luxury automotive maintenance, high-end furniture, and even recurring subscriptions that had nothing to do with cybersecurity development. It was amateurish, yet it had gone unnoticed for months because I had been the one providing the cover. "Is it conclusive?" I asked. It is substantial," the auditor replied. "There is a clear pattern of embezzlement hidden within the project's maintenance budget. When combined with the inflated revenue reports Nina presented, it forms a case for material financial fraud." Gregory looked at me, waiting for my cue. "The firm's position is now untenable. We cannot move forward with any level of support, nor can we continue to act as the guarantors for this entity. The risk to our firm's reputation is absolute." I took a deep breath. This was the moment of final separation. I reached for the pen resting on the table. "I agree," I said. "We need to issue the notice of immediate termination of our service agreement and withdraw all technical support." I pulled the memorandum toward me. It outlined the formal severing of ties between our firm and Nina's company, citing a breach of fiduciary duty and the findings of the forensic audit. I read the document one last time, ensuring every clause was airtight. My signature would finalize the end of my professional association with her. My hand didn't tremble as I signed my name at the bottom of the page. The ink dried quickly on the paper, marking a permanent end to the collaborative facade. I handed the document back to Gregory. "Process it," I said, "and make sure the legal team is prepared for any pushback. We have all the documentation we need to justify this decision." Gregory nodded, already preparing to distribute the copies. "The firm will handle the logistics from here. You are officially removed from the project hierarchy as of this morning." I stood up, leaving the folder on the table. My career was no longer entangled with hers. The audit had provided the clarity I needed, and the signature had provided the finality. I walked out of the room, leaving the evidence of her choices behind for the legal team to manage, ready to move toward the next steps of the day. The digital clock on the wall hit 1 p.m. as I stepped into the boardroom. The air was heavy with the silence of high-stakes tension. Marcus sat at the head of the mahogany table, his legal team flanking him on both sides. Across from them sat Nina, looking smaller than I had ever seen her, her posture rigid as she stared at the stack of documents in front of her. I took my seat as the lead compliance reviewer. I placed my own file of findings, the result of the forensic audit, firmly on the table. Stella. Marcus acknowledged, his voice neutral. Thank you for coming. We are here to resolve the questions raised by the compliance hold. He turned his gaze toward Nina. Ms. Nina, we have reviewed the preliminary findings from the independent audit. There are discrepancies here that suggest significant misallocation of funds. You have the floor to explain these figures. Nina glanced at me, her eyes flashing with a mix of betrayal and desperation. This is a misunderstanding, Marcus. Stella has been managing the back end of these reports for years. If there are discrepancies, she is the one who put them there. She's trying to sabotage this deal because she couldn't stand being sidelined during the funding announcement. The room went silent. The accusation hung in the air, a desperate reach by a CEO losing her grip on reality. I didn't flinch. I waited for the legal team to finish scanning through my evidence before I spoke. My role as the guarantor was to verify the accuracy of the financial architecture provided to this syndicate. I said, my voice steady and clear. The documents currently under review are not my work. They are the unaltered logs pulled directly from the company's internal server. The discrepancy in spending is not a result of accounting errors. It is the result of direct diversion of funds. Nina stood up, her face flushed. You're lying. You've hated that I built this company on my own. You're just trying to take credit for my success by claiming I'm a fraud. I looked at her, then back to Marcus. Our firm does not invest where material financial fraud is found. Marcus didn't even look at her. He gestured to his lead attorney, who slid a document across the table. We have reviewed the forensic data, Marcus stated. The evidence shows that capital was moved into personal accounts under the guise of infrastructure costs. We are not just holding the transaction, we are revoking the entire funding offer. The color drained from Nina's face. She looked at Marcus, then at the lawyers, searching for a lifeline that wasn't there. She looked at me, realizing for the first time that my signature was the final nail in her professional coffin. The confidence she had worn like armor for years crumbled, leaving her exposed. This is not over, Nina whispered, though her voice shook. I will find other investors. You are welcome to try, Marcus replied, already signaling the end of the meeting. But you will be doing so without the backing of this firm and with a flag on your record that will make any serious investor run in the other direction. He stood up, signaling to his team to pack their files. Nina remained seated, staring at the table. She had spent the entire afternoon trying to deflect blame, but in the face of absolute evidence, her performance had failed. I didn't say another word. I picked up my file and walked toward the door. As I reached the threshold, I took one last look back. The boardroom was empty of its former promise. The deal was dead, the fraud was documented, and the facade had finally completely collapsed. The fluorescent lights of the corridor hummed, providing a stark backdrop as I exited the building. Nina, along with Mom and Dad, had been waiting by the elevator bank. As I turned the corner, they intercepted me, their faces no longer contorted with the anger I had seen the night before. Instead, their expressions were fragile, carefully constructed to elicit sympathy. Stella, please? Mom started reaching out to touch my arm. I stepped back, avoiding the contact. We've been talking. We know things are difficult with the project, but we're family. You can't just turn your back on us after everything Nina has been through today. I looked at them, observing the way they huddled together. Nina stood slightly behind them, her head bowed in a posture of forced humility. She wasn't looking for redemption. She was waiting for a reprieve. Dad took a step forward, his voice tight with an urgency I had never heard when he spoke to me about my own career. He gripped my sleeve, his hand trembling slightly. Stella, listen to me. Nina has made mistakes, we know that. But we're in a precarious position. You're cutting ties with her firm, and that's your professional choice. But if you stop supporting the family, we're finished. Who is going to pay the monthly bills for the house? Who is going to maintain our insurance and the living expenses? The air in the hallway seemed to drop in temperature. It wasn't about Nina's failed business. It wasn't about the trauma of the public fallout or the damage to their reputation. The question wasn't about whether Nina was okay. It was about the immediate collapse of their own lifestyle. "You're worried about the bills?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. "Of course we are," Mom chimed in, her facade slipping into blunt entitlement. "You've always handled the finances for the family trust. If you stop the transfers, we can't maintain the lifestyle you've provided for us. Nina's company was the vehicle, but you were the engine. You have to keep the accounts open." I felt a strange sense of clarity wash over me. For years, I had been the silent provider, the one who ensured their comfort while they focused their praise and resources on Nina's performative success. I had been their self-made daughter's secret benefactor. I reached into my bag and pulled out a tablet. I didn't need to dig through files. I had a summary ready. I opened the digital ledger and held it out so they could see the screen. It was a comprehensive list of every wire transfer, every mortgage payment, and every private expense I had funneled to them over the last 3 years. Payments they had always referred to as family support, but were, in reality, the only reason they were still living in that house. "These are the records of every payment I've made," I said, tapping the screen. "As of today, all recurring transfers are terminated. I have already contacted the bank to close the joint access points. The lifestyle you're talking about ends with my signature." The silence that followed was suffocating. Their eyes scanned the screen, and the realization hit them with the force of a physical blow. The ATM was not just closing the account, she was leaving the building. "You can't do this to us," Dad whispered, his grip on my sleeve slackening. "We're your parents." "And for 3 years I've been your primary financial resource," I replied. "That ends now." I walked past them toward the parking garage. I didn't look back to see if Nina was crying or if Mom was shouting. I didn't care. I had finally severed the last thread that bound me to their manufactured reality. I was alone, but for the first time the foundation beneath me was my own. 4 months later, the headlines regarding the startup had shifted from praise for innovation to detailed reports on financial malpractice. Nina was currently facing a series of civil lawsuits from the investor syndicate, and the Securities and Exchange Commission had formally opened an investigation into the company's revenue disclosures. With no capital left to sustain operations and her personal assets under a court-ordered freeze, the firm had filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The grand vision she had curated had collapsed entirely under the weight of the legal scrutiny. I stood in the center of the same ballroom where I had once been denied entry. This time, the velvet ropes were moved aside for me. I was the keynote speaker for the annual Austin FinTech Summit, an invitation that carried a weight I hadn't fully appreciated until I stepped onto the stage. The audience was filled with industry leaders, risk analysts, and venture capitalists, the very people who had once been misled by the manufactured success of my sister's company. I walked to the podium and looked out at the sea of expectant faces. My voice projected clearly through the auditorium, steady and unscripted. In the world of finance, we talk a lot about risk assessment, technical audits, and market valuation, I began. But we rarely discuss the internal risks posed by personal relationships. We often assume that our professional integrity can coexist with the people we trust the most. My experience over the last few months taught me that professional boundaries are not barriers. They are the only structures that keep a career from becoming a liability. I paused, letting the silence settle. Many of you have asked about the fallout of that particular project. It wasn't an easy decision, and it certainly wasn't a pleasant process. However, choosing between the reputation I spent a decade building and the comfort of family expectations was a binary choice. I learned that when you allow your professional standards to be compromised by the people closest to you, you aren't just losing your edge, you are losing your agency. Never let the convenience of loyalty silence your ethical judgment. I looked toward the back of the room, seeing colleagues who had stood by my side during the audit process. Success that requires the erasure of your own work is not success. It is a performance. And performances, no matter how convincing, eventually reach the end of their act. I concluded my session by thanking the organizers and the attendees. As the applause filled the room, I knew that the professional ecosystem had righted itself. The fraud was exposed, the legal system was doing its work, and I had successfully reclaimed my own path. The questions I face today proved that many of you have struggled with the same tension between duty to family and your personal professional ethics. It is a heavy burden, but one that is necessary to shed if you want to build something that actually lasts. Have you ever had to choose between your career and someone you love? Drop a comment below and share how you navigated that conflict. If you found this story helpful, don't forget to follow for more insights on high-stakes business and personal growth.